Hi everyone and welcome to the Friday, November 19th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman of NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, Scott, so folks at home, we're recording this a little bit early because the Elizabeth Holmes trial has kind of kicked into overdrive all of a sudden. And so Scott's there 5 days a week now, and he's filing stories and everything else every night. So if the world comes to an end Friday morning, we're going to miss it. So just bear with us.
You'll hear it from somebody else.
Okay, so I thought today we'd look in depth again at the Theranos Elizabeth Holmes trial.
Yeah, this is the closest we've had to breaking news in several weeks. All of a sudden, at the very end of testimony on Wednesday evening, literally 3 minutes before the judge says, "You're all gone," he brings a witness to the stand, which is a real surprise. And it wasn't a witness that you'd heard of. It wasn't, oh, James Mattis is only in town today, or Henry Kissinger is only in town for a few hours. This is a woman that is from Phoenix. She took a Theranos test, and that's why she's on the stand. Nobody's heard of her. She's not a $100 million investor. She took this test.
We're finally hearing from real people.
Yeah, and again, the jury, as they did, boy, it's been several weeks since we heard from the first, call it patient, that took a test. She took a test in Phoenix at a Walgreens, and it came back saying she had tested positive for HIV antibodies. And again,
unbelievable. That's
right.
I don't know about you, but I would take that as pretty close to a death sentence.
Well, she was admittedly very emotional about this. She said, she testified, "I was very emotional." Now, we're going to get cross-examination that says, this says you tested positive for HIV antibodies. It didn't say you have, et cetera, et cetera. But even the judge, even the judge said, "This is, you must have thought I have HIV." And she said, "Yes, I was very emotional." And the courtroom got quiet. And it's a more crowded courtroom than we've seen in a while. People are starting to show up because I think they see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. They know we're going to get some emotional witnesses. And I was surprised at how quick this was. The judge did end after a few minutes saying, "Okay, we'll hear more from her tomorrow." But the prosecution got what they needed, which was a very emotional statement from her.
Do you think the judge let her go on today as kind of a warning to all of you in the press box? You better be here tomorrow. You better, bring your A game, because this is going to be a headline moment around the world.
I don't know. I don't know if that's how judges work. As I've told you.
Why would he do 3 minutes with a,
I know he wants to move it along. He's been complaining, especially to the defense team, that they've taken so long on cross-examination. And I must say,
we had that hedge fund guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's his name? Brian Grossman, Chief Investment Officer at PFM Health Sciences.
San Francisco based. So he's the most recent witness that we saw before this woman, Brian Grossman. And he and his fund invested $96 million into Theranos.
Right.
At the, they were part of the reason that this was a $9 billion company.
And in a sense, he actually did some due diligence. He made himself into a patient, right?
Well, yeah.
Didn't he go down to Walgreens and get a blood test?
He went to a Walgreens on his own. And it's interesting that you bring this up, Mike, and it's good that you did, because he went to a Walgreens and was surprised that it was the regular long needle and that the results took more than 4 hours to come back. And
I'd always thought, and I think most people thought, this is like a diabetes test. One drop on the magnetic strip, and you put it in the reader, and it gives you all the information.
Right. I mean, I've had blood drawn before the regular way, obviously, by, let's say, a Quest or a LabCorp, and I don't find it all that time-consuming. But you know what? I don't mind needles. I've given blood 100 times.
Yeah, but it doesn't fit the message. This was a venous draw, not a finger stick.
Right. I only bring up that I've done that because Theranos was going to do it so much more differently. So much differently.
Yes.
It was going to be a simple drop of blood that had so much.
Like a diabetes test.
Yeah. And that you could do it with a finger stick. And that's not how this was. And he testified that, I got a little suspicious.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, part of the cross-examination was, hey, rich hedge fund guy. You still invested $96 million.
Yeah.
And they did.
Even after, he had to be suspicious. He did that. He went and saw Holmes and Sonny Balwani, right?
Right.
And brought up, and he said Holmes did most of the talking, and said that he and his colleagues were told that Theranos could run 1,000 blood tests on this proprietary technology. So this wasn't what I expected. Don't worry. We can do thousands of them.
Right.
No problem.
Well, and they told
and she
him,
can match LabCorp
right.
and Quest. Now, LabCorp and Quest do, I've had a number of those blood draws.
Sure.
There's a lot of different tests that go on with your blood. And she was saying she could do the same thing, while insiders said they could do 12 different tests.
Right.
So it's like she kept painting this picture, and against their own better judgment, these investors were still writing her checks, big checks.
Right. And so what Trump...
Oh, she also said Afghanistan and Iraq, we're using it there.
Right.
And we've already made $200 million. I mean, now we're getting egregious.
Right. So what trumps their better judgment, if we've learned nothing from this trial? Greed trumps their better judgment.
Yes.
And so we still had hedge funds, we still had New York investors, San Francisco investors, Sand Hill Road investors. We had individual investors who were very rich, like Rupert Murdoch, that talked about the DeVos family. And they all testified that eventually they were suspicious. Smart for them, but they still invested the money.
But if they were so greedy it made them into slack-jawed rubes, how come it took this long and this woman to catch them on their stupidity? You know, how did they manage to get this rich by being this naively greedy?
That's a fair question. I don't have an answer for that, obviously. I don't know how the DeVos family made its money. I have a good idea how Rupert Murdoch made some of his money. But a lot of these investors, as you and I know from covering Sand Hill Road, you know, if you go 1 for 9, in baseball, you don't have a job.
Right.
But if you're a VC and that one is eBay or Siebel Systems,
you win.
Right.
It covers all the failures.
Right. And so you have to put your money out there and sort of see what sticks. And so the downside,
especially if you're making billion-dollar funds right now,
right.
that money's got to go somewhere. It's got to go fast because your investors are not going to be happy.
Right. And so I do feel for the pension funds. I feel for the individual investors that, you know, ponied up what they could. But do you feel bad for the DeVos family because it lost $100 million in Theranos?
Not in the slightest.
And I wonder if the jury feels the same way.
But they will for that lady with that bad, wrong HIV
right.
result.
And the rumor is that the prosecution is getting close to resting its part of the case. And you're right. This wouldn't be a bad way because there was a woman who took a test earlier in the trial and testified that test showed that she had miscarried her child. She was pregnant.
Yes.
Took more tests and it said, no, you're fine. Your levels are fine. And she did deliver a healthy baby. And that had the jury silenced. Again, parent or not, you know how that
absolutely.
And this, again, had the jury silenced.
Everybody in the jury was sitting there going, what would I do with that news?
Right.
Go home and say goodbye?
Well, and in both cases, it was a health practitioner that these women trusted who said, do this again somewhere else.
Yeah.
Go to a clinic, go to anywhere, but do this multiple times.
This is a great argument for nurses.
Yeah, absolutely.
They seem to be the firewall against this stuff. Couple more things.
Sure.
There's a rumor that perhaps the defense will not present its case.
Well, right. I mean, who knows? The defense doesn't have to prove anything.
No.
Period. In any trial. And in this trial...
Now, if they think there's reasonable doubt, why would they screw around going through their side? Just go with the jury's mood.
Right, because any witness that they put forward, the prosecution gets to cross.
Exactly.
And obviously. So I don't know. It would be, to be honest, a little surprising if they just said, we have no one to bring forward. So the big question, and the question I get asked the most is, will Elizabeth Holmes herself testify?
Yeah, that was my next question.
And again, I have no idea. They're not hinting at this other than the fact that she's there every minute of the trial. But who knows? She's there. She's looking at the jury. The jury is looking at her. Granted, she's masked the whole time.
With elegant, different colored face masks.
Yes. She has a different look than she did in the Theranos
Yes.
years as CEO. Um, and is that accidental? No, none of this is accidental. Is it prelude to her actually taking the stand? I don't know.
Well, that'll be the big moment.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, spreading the news of that big moment, if it happens, I understand is getting to be a challenge because the judge is starting to get ticked off at the loud typing.
So you've seen some of the tweets on this.
Yeah.
In the courtroom, yeah, and it's funny to me because, all right, I don't remember a day where reporters had actual, Smith Coronas in the courtroom or anything, but
Well, they never had them.
Oh,
They had
okay.
them just outside the courtroom.
All right.
You see those pictures when VE Day was announced, all the reporters fighting each other to get out of FDR's office to get to the wall of payphones.
That makes sense. So in my era, as far as the word processing era, it's always been pretty quiet, and it's just gotten quieter and quieter. And
Yeah.
whether you're on a Dell or a Mac or
Yeah.
whatever, it seems that it's pretty quiet. But I'll admit, if I'm in the overflow courtroom
Right.
and things are quiet and I'm banging something out, I'll listen and I think, oh, okay, I'm actually making a little noise on this keyboard. But I haven't covered enough trials to know if it's common that 3 and now maybe even 4 times during this trial, the judges admonished people in there for literally typing too loudly.
So are people putting aside their $120 keyboards and going out and get the cheap non-tactile clicking keyboards?
No, they're coming into the overflow courtroom where apparently we can be as loud as we want.
Yeah, but there was a complaint I guess there was some tweets by reporters saying that the stream is not the most reliable thing in the overflow room.
Well, there have been a few times when we've had to, check the sound or try to get the door unlocked because we've locked out. It's not a perfect system. We are clearly, those of us in the overflow courtroom, this also rans.
Yeah, you're the Vox Populi.
But when, your phone is ringing and you got a deadline and you've got to run things and jump outside to interview an analyst, it's better to be not rude and conspicuous. Right. So the overflow courtroom helps. But
what was the reaction of the reporters? Because I know reporters, having been one and having been around TV reporters, they usually think they're the most important people in the building.
Why would you say that?
So, and they're always running a commentary. If they're not actually in the chamber, everybody's talking, everybody's making comments. What happened when that woman gave her testimony today?
Oh, about the HIV.
Yeah.
So it was a collective gasp.
Yeah.
Because it's a serious thing, like you said. You imagine for a second if that happened to you. But because of the timing of it, at the very end of the day,
yeah.
And I'll speak for myself, and I know I'm speaking for others, when we had our stories filed,
yeah,
to realize that the big news was what we had not filed and what literally happened in the last 3 minutes. And this has happened. It's not just TV reporters that deal with this, radio reporters, newspaper reporters. You're all but going home for the day and something catches on fire or, something horrible happens. You've got to report on it.
Well, I hate to be cynical, but it's also kind of fun.
Yeah.
Because it takes you back to old-fashioned journalism where it's like you're on the phone, get me rewrite, and you're literally dictating the lead.
Right. And so my typing was probably a little louder than it was even in the courtroom as we changed the lead of the story and got that in there. And because that's what you have to do because, that's what people are going to be talking about and your competitors are going to talk about it. And it is the latest news. I am a little surprised that this woman got 3 minutes on the stand and now her name is everywhere and her story is everywhere and she has to come back instead of a fresh start. But again, I don't decide what the judge does.
No. You think he's doing, shall I ask you this? You think he's doing a good job?
I really don't have anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not just saying that to be diplomatic, but I just don't know. It surprises me that the cross-examining is allowed to go as far and as minuscule detailed as it is.
Yeah, you mentioned it was 6 hours, 8 hours?
Right, to cross someone who lost some money to Theranos. And the questions, I mean, they literally got down to the point where he had this hedge fund guy.
Yeah.
And you know how rich these people are. He had him explain what it means to make a profit.
Oh my God.
And then about an hour later, he was explaining what quarterly earnings are. And I don't know that that's germane to why we're here in this trial. But it is a little strange to have someone say, well, when you make more money than you spend, that sort of thing.
Kind of insulting to jurors,
yeah,
too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to other things.
All right.
Well, we got time. Nvidia. Boy, what a week.
What a decade.
What a decade,
yeah.
Well, that's true. I mean, but they haven't lost any momentum. Revenue jumped 50% year over year to 7.1 billion. Earnings per share $1.11 expected. They hit 117. Mostly from gaming and their data center stuff. Gaming was 3.22 billion versus 3.18 expected. Data center revenue was incredible, 2.9 billion versus 2.69 billion expected. And they credit a lot of it to their AI operation.
Yeah, they're really in a lot of hot spots. Remember, a few years ago, they were the leader in chips for driverless cars when that was taking off. And then they found themselves the leader in chips for Bitcoin mining, which they handled very well because that became less hot. But they were able to transition. I'm surprised, given what you and I, your podcast is about what's hot in technology, how often chip companies come up. AMD, Nvidia, let's throw some love at Qualcomm for their recent earning reports. They're at an all-time high, which is amazing.
This is what I told you years ago.
I know.
It always comes down to chips. Nvidia, well, look what they've done. They've done two things simultaneously. One, they've captured onto the boom in AI.
Right.
Okay? And they're just perfectly positioned. But they've also essentially reinvented computer imagery, computer graphics simultaneously. I mean, this is a company that's doing so well, it could literally divide itself in two, and both parts could take off.
Because you know what they do well is they allow other companies to do well after those companies pay them a lot of money for their chips, which I would also define as Qualcomm's business model. You know, the phones you carry around, the laptops, you're not thinking Qualcomm. And maybe that's because they didn't have a clever thing like Intel inside.
Right.
But Qualcomm allows these companies, and Nvidia allows these companies, the AI companies, the car companies, the gaming companies, to soar because they have that back-end unsexy plumbing that Nvidia provides, and that is really lucrative plumbing.
But they've done it well enough now that when you say, well, it's the graphics are driven by an Nvidia chip, you go, oh, okay, well then we're okay.
Right.
It's not like which one, we don't know the product numbers or anything else or the specs. We just know this is going to be the best there is out there.
I mean, Nvidia is flirting with something like 750, 800, billion dollars in market value, well above Intel.
Yeah.
Well above anybody else, really, and catching up to, Tesla and Facebook.
Another $1 trillion company in Silicon Valley.
And they've done it with, it's like finding out that, I don't know, Brandon Crawford plays, or Buster Posey, a whole career with it. They've done it with one CEO for decades, Jensen Huang, and he deserves a lot of credit for that.
Lawsuit alleging security. We're back to Facebook. We got to do Facebook every week, I'm afraid. A lawsuit alleging securities law violation filed against Meta by Ohio's largest pension fund. And the Attorney General says that'll be pretty easy to prove. Basically, public statements by Facebook didn't match the stuff that I think the Wall Street Journal found, those internal memos, which essentially said, we give special deals and special breaks to famous people. And we talk about the fact that we don't do stuff like that we're fair to everyone, and we're basically lying to the general public. Well, that memo is going to be Exhibit A in this lawsuit. The guy said, we're not actually doing what we said. We are not actually doing what we say we do publicly, said the confidential memo. Unlike the rest of our community, these people can violate our standards without any consequences. And the Attorney General said, well, okay, they've essentially admitted to fraud, and we're going to go after them.
Yeah, I am guessing here, looking ahead to Facebook's future, that if they are not broken up, and that's a tough thing to imagine that they will be, the lawsuits will come because people, and the Ohio Attorney General, who knew that was going to start it, but attorneys general are going to say, well, wait a minute, Instagram is admitting that our teenage girls are being hurt emotionally by going on. We know that Facebook is admitting that they're lying and letting these outside forces.
You and I talked about this when the Wall Street Journal series came out, that Where are the class action suits? We know they're waiting, just around the bend. Meanwhile, Facebook has pissed off the federal prosecutors, because the prosecutors were looking into I guess like a neo-Nazi group, and they went to Facebook to get all the get the data for the case, and Facebook said, "Oh, we destroyed all that." So now they don't have enough evidence to go after this extremist group. That's not a good look too.
No, and I mean it's one of those things that's also going to put extra pressure on Section 230, right? Is Facebook really responsible for these things, or are they just sort of the conduit? And I think people are getting a little sick of Facebook just saying we're just a platform. And at some point that reaches some sort of critical mass where enough people with pitchforks, show up at the door.
Nobody's written the textbook for the PR majors in all the universities around the country on what do you do if your company becomes the locus, not just the subject of bad publicity and all that, but you become the locus of all the bad publicity accruing to your industry. What do you do then?
You suggest to the company that they change their name.
To Meta.
Kidding. Yeah, I'm kidding. Right, and that's, that along with, and another thing I've thought of while covering the Elizabeth Holmes trial, that along with business ethics really needs to be taught in business schools.
Yes.
Ethics above profits and positive PR that really you can back up, as opposed to just having a PR team to put lipstick on whatever horrible thing you have. Something that you trust, someone in that division you trust, that you will listen to and actually follow up on, because they know how to get positive feedback from the community instead of just an onslaught of negative feedback.
Well, Jim Morgan, I don't know if we talked about this before, but Jim Morgan with Tom Hayes as his marketing guy, they consciously contributed to the community in order to build a reservoir of goodwill.
This was applied
So when
materials.
things went bad, everyone thought, oh, it's a bad thing to happen to a good company. Not, it's a deserved thing for a lousy company.
Right. There's something about that, and they, you're talking about Applied Materials, were one of the early companies that would sponsor things and, spend money to get goodwill. And, Facebook did a little of that in the beginning, especially when it moved into that area of, sort of Menlo Park / East Palo Alto.
Sure.
They would fund a police substation, but it's got to go much deeper than that.
Oh, yeah.
And it really hasn't.
No. Okay, finally, well, you're a basketball fan.
Yes. This is my favorite story.
I mean, what do you think of this? Crypto.com is, as of Christmas morning this year, Staples Arena in LA. I mean that's an iconic place, right?
Staples Center, absolutely.
Staples Center. Crypto.com is going to rename the arena.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's an iconic name and everybody knows it. They call it the house that Kobe built.
Yeah.
All the great athletics.
I remember driving by it a few months ago. I mean, on a business trip, and I was like, there it is, the Staples Center, and the Lakers are playing tonight.
Yep.
I
always thought it transcended the fact that it was named after an office supply store. But that's the least modern thing you can, it's sort of like naming it after a railroad train station.
And it's kind of a staple of LA life.
Right. Very good. But it's, Staples is an office supply store. Crypto.com, well, now that's, on the vanguard of cutting edge. It's amazing to me.
They're in Singapore.
It's true. I mean, they couldn't get a local crypto company. They're literally crawling all over the place. It's also funny to me that it's a 20-year deal.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 years ago, nobody was aware of cryptocurrency. And in 20 years from now, is there going to be a crypto? Yeah, I mean, it's going to be.
When you think about 20 years at $700 million is only $35 million a year. I mean, did the Staples folks get a good deal? Especially when this is not likely to last.
I don't know. And it's one of those things where who knows if at some point someone else will have to take over the contract because there is no more Crypto.com or whatever. Also funny to me, how a lot of stadiums, Staples Center was Staples Center. Nobody named it anything else. But you'd get we call it the Jack, or we call it the big phone when it was Pac Bell Park.
Right.
Crypto.com, to me, the first thing that jumped out was the crypt.
Yes.
Which,
nobody
lives in a crypt.
We can have fans dressed as the crypt keeper, crypto.
Yeah.
I got to say this, it's better than like Fleet.
I guess.
Because it better be named after cryptocurrency than a laxative.
Yeah. Look, if the Lakers win another title, the Clippers hang on to Kawhi Leonard and do well. If the Kings have won titles, the Sparks have won titles. LA is an incredible sports title town.
Yeah.
And if that keeps happening, nobody's going to care what they call it.
Right.
Really. But there is something very right now and almost super trendy, and that's dangerous when you do something. You don't buy clothes and say, this is what I'm going to wear for 20 years. Nobody.
Especially in this field where this company could be dead tomorrow, or there could be a gigantic scandal connected to this.
If crypto got,
I still call it Pac Bell up here, because I don't want to deal with these latest, names that are going to be gone in 2 years.
It was controversial. I remember one of the earliest Silicon Valley stories I covered were when 3Com named Candlestick Park,
Yeah.
And were people ticked off at 3Com? But they had never had, they went public as a company, they sold lots of routers, whatever.
Yeah.
But more people heard of them through that deal. That was money well spent.
So it's a good PR thing for the buyer, but I don't know about the recipient.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Okay, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.